Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, tentacles, viruses, bats, and squids and plagues. Welcome back to the Alternative Tentacles bATcast. I am your host, Dominic Davi. You might know me from the band Tsunami Bomb, or you might not, but you definitely know me from the last few episodes of this bATcast. I am here with the general manager of Alternative Tentacles, Freya Yamamoto.
Hello.
Welcome back.
I came back.
You came back. I am glad that we're doing this. That episode that we did 2 episodes ago now, according to the people, was a lot of fun. And it kind of like, I feel like we stumbled on the idea of kind of giving people a sort of a window to
Yeah.
what's going on at Alternative Tentacles. It's ironic, though, I want to point out that both, for those watching the video version, I know this might not be the most interesting display, but both Freya and I have recently moved, and we were both in largely white rooms.
Yeah.
We are just talking about, at least I have this shelving stuff going on over here, but like, we're
Yeah, there's
both,
like
you could,
nothing behind me. Semi on purpose, just because like we're trying to put furniture. I'm trying to like paint the walls before I put too much furniture in here.
yeah, I
So
see a stack of little papers over there, and then for me, I have like packed up art that's
yeah.
against the wall in the closet. So
Yeah, I have
so
a bunch
forgive
of
us for
most of
not
it's
being as exciting as we might be normally.
I'm hoping in the future it'll look a lot better. I'm excited to like actually like make my office look kind of nice here since uh I'm now more not always at the warehouse. So
Yeah, you're kind of being a little bit more remote.
yeah.
You're coming in a little half time, but
Yeah.
working full time, but coming
Working
in
full
not
time.
all
I'm
the
not going anywhere. I am
time.
literally just my wife got a nice new job and we moved to the South Bay.
Nice.
Which
Yeah,
is
and
cool.
then I moved to the northern part of the East Bay. So we're taking over the Bay Area for Alternative
Yeah.
Tentacles. Alternative Tentacles is based just over the bridge, but it's technically its heart is in San Francisco. So,
Yeah.
what can we say? We're all over the place over here. So anyway,
Yeah.
thank you all for tuning in. I thought today, since last time we talked about the act of hunting down these pieces of records that we've been reissuing, that maybe today would be a really good time to talk about what goes in the actual production
Yeah.
of the records. So, say to continue our conversation from last time, if anyone wants
Yeah.
to find it, it's the episode we did just before the Voodoo 5 interview. We talked about what it was like to hunt down and find these old releases and how it can be a little bit of a struggle, and sometimes you find them in interesting places. So today, let's talk about once we've collected those that recording. Let's start with the
Yeah.
recording. What do we have to do to make this a
Sure.
record?
Okay, so it depends a few things. So specifically talking about vinyl versus like streaming versus CD, they're all slightly different to some degree. I mean, digital and CD usually tend to be the same. Those or tend to be the same files, but for vinyl, usually it's especially right now, a lot of it is going through. We use a mastering engineer, Anne Marie Cernum Productions. I don't have a good way of spelling or giving you a link to if anyone else wants to try using her, but she is awesome and is kind of she's basically George Horn, who used to be in the Bay Area and a legendary mastering engineer here out of like Fantasy Studios.
Out of
She's
Berkeley, California, where
out of Berkeley,
most people are.
California, which is they were around for a very long time. I was very lucky to be able to go in there a couple of times, and it was absolutely beautiful studio.
It really was. It
It,
was a tragedy when it shut down. It kind of
yeah,
broke my
that
heart.
it's yeah, that's a whole. I really wish that like I know that a couple of things about that, but I really wish it would open back or something. Somebody would be able to take it over and it be a place again because it's really there's been a lot of amazing music made there.
Alternative
Uh,
Tentacles was really lucky to have George Horn as the go-to person. Jello wouldn't go to anyone else. That was who
yeah,
he would go to. And I was really lucky because on his recommendation, I took Tsunami Bomb's collection, all of our old stuff, I took to George Horn, and he did it at Fantasy Records. And it was one of the last projects he was working on at Fantasy before it shut down. But George sadly passed away,
Yeah.
and all his equipment and went to it wasn't without struggle, but
Yeah.
it went to his basically, the engineer he had been mentoring,
Yeah.
and she took over and has now stepped up to be doing mastering and working with us.
Yeah. And
Um,
her and Jello seem to get along. So that works out. I was like, that was my one worry was when he went
it takes a
to
personality.
yeah, it does. You gotta know what you're getting to. Like you kind of so. I think it's also one of those things where he wants to be in being in the room versus like he's not someone that really accepts a digital file. I'm gonna go listen to it kind of person. He's like, I want to be there listening into it in the room and all that stuff, and that's great. But not every mastering engineer is set up to do that or has that capability of also being a person that's kind of always there and with somebody. Um, Especially with a personality like Jello's can be a little bit, you know,
Just to backtrack real quick,
yeah,
like I know this. That was, oh, sorry. I realized I was like, I know this. Let me rephrase
yeah,
that statement. For those who don't understand what mastering is, because we say that a lot and we tell people this project is in mastering. We're mastering this music. What does mastering mean? Do we know?
oh, oh, do you want me to
Do you want to take it, or or should we
yeah,
explain it? I
I mean,
mean,
I could explain it in the very like my like pseudo like I mean I'm not the I know a decent amount about it but not like the most intricate knowledge but like based on the like layman's kind of variation of it, it's taking all of the mixes and the tracks of everything and it's kind of equalizing them over to create a cohesive album sound. Basically it's a lot more, it's a lot, you're not mixing the album again, you're like mastering it, you're making it, it's a lot of like the files, like making sure the files are set up properly for either vinyl and making sure that they're output correctly for either to go to a lacquer or for digital,
yeah, so
and
it
coded
sounds
correctly.
consistent throughout
Yeah.
anything that you listen to. Like when you mix it is how loud the bass is, how loud the drums,
Yeah.
where's the vocals sitting, and then you take that, and that recording will sound different on different stereos,
Yeah.
just because of how they're EQ'd. So you need to go through and master the recording and EQ it out so that it is consistent
Mhm.
on any recording that you listen to. So that's what makes it consistent on each thing. And there is, like as you said, there's a difference between vinyl
Yeah.
and then the digital slash CD is actually similar. Those can be the same
Yeah. In
generally.
general,
Some
those
people
could be
change
like
it.
the same, but mastering for vinyl or for cassette or anything that's like a specific medium that is not like a or like anything that's a specific medium, you technically would have a different master for it. Now, it's
Mhm.
not always the case, and like there are places that'll work with, correct cutting, like specifically digital files to lacquer, and but and it's also one of those things where like we tend to be a little bit more specific, and a lot of labels will be a little bit more specific that with that, and the budget is there for those kinds of things. Versus, I know some independent artists that, sometimes that's not as easy to get, several different masters for different things you're trying to do. So like when
I
you're,
mean, for people, just to
yeah,
throw in, for people listening, just to give you an idea, have you ever listened? This is for you guys listening. Have you ever put in a record and it sounded bright and clear and loud? Okay, that's mastering. But have you put in a record that sounded really quiet right after that? Or if you've done a mix and how it drops, all of a sudden that sounds really quiet, that may not have been mastered or not mastered well.
yeah,
So it's like different places. What Freya is saying is different labels focus place a higher or higher or lower emphasis on this stage because depending on how much money you have, it seems extravagant. The album's mixed, it sounds good. Let's just go, but it's an important step, and for Jello, it's a huge step.
yeah. It's his last kind of like quality checks of everything. Like, and I mean, especially with the last few things that we've had come out, he's been like pretty much there for it, or been instrumental in like shaping that and wanting to understand it. Like, I know for me, I'm listening to it as like the kind of like, okay, like I understand that like when I'm getting a mix from an artist, like I kind of am trusting that their vision has been met, and I'm kind of listening for imperfections or things that might stand out for a master. I'm not usually listening to be like, oh, this should be here, this should be there as much because that for me is like I can give those feedback as to some degree, and like usually I try and give that earlier on when we're listening to the rough mixes or demos, or like we've talked about this when you show me Tsunami Bomb stuff that you guys have been working on, of like, here's my opinion, like take that for, with a grain of salt or whatever you want to do. Like you don't have to. I never tell any artist or anyone that like you have to do exactly what I'm saying. It's more of, this is what my ears hear. This is my suggestions for things that, having done this for a while, like this is what my opinion is. That's not to say that everyone agrees with it. And there are times that Joe and I don't always even see eye to eye on stuff because our ears are vastly different for certain things. And we're also listening for different things. There's things that he'll be like, I love the way this sounds. And I'm like, that sounds kind of like a not as great to me just because it's a different, it's some of it is also him referencing like an original version of that. And that's something that I don't have always context for or as much care for necessarily, of like, does this match the original pressing of this and that we've done or that like somebody else did? And it's like, that to me is like irrelevant as long as it sounds good contextually to the listener and to what it is supposed to sound like. So those are things like that that are some things that I don't necessarily take into account for when we've listened to like test pressings or masters or other things like that. I have a tendency to just kind of listen for like, okay, everything sounds like it, like a good master. It feels like it's going to play well. It's going to like everything sounds consistent or not. You know, those kinds of
It,
things aren't like wildly different between tracks.
Yeah, it's
So
tough for people sometimes to understand this
yeah,
particular process. So a good way to describe it, I think, is think of it as the way to solidify the vision. The mixing indicates what the vision for the song is. So once we have an artist and an engineer and producer, if a producer's involved, who's mixed a record, you got an idea of what they want it to sound like. So mastering would be an engineer going through and ensuring that it sounds like that. And sometimes the people who engineer can master it, but most of the time you want some new ears to step in because vinyl is going to be a much more deeper, more dynamic range. A digital and CDs are considered more compressed, where the waveforms are made smaller because they have to be
it's
um,
more that the peaks they're compressed as and the peaks and valleys are not as significant. So when you think of it that way, it's not the wave file, like they're not quieter or they're not smaller. It's
yeah,
the difference is compressed. So the wave file is actually pretty full.
yeah.
It's just compressed where similar for when mastering for tape or other things like that, there's a noise floor you have to get above to some degree. Otherwise you lose stuff when doing some of that stuff. So I've done some old tape duplication things, and that's always a fun, weird thing to try and take a digital master and like compress it slightly again because you kind of need to get the noise floor to be not to like overcome, and so it's kind of a weird little like try and trick it
Yeah.
some things like that before, which is my like rough like I mastered this and sort of like I'm not a mastering engineer by any means. I would not consider myself that, but I
Yeah,
have had to do some stuff like that to get it to work for like files and things.
I want to make sure everybody listening knows because I'm sure that there's somebody out there going, "You're not saying this or you're not
Oh
emphasizing that."
yeah,
I want to emphasize we are not mastering engineers. And if
no.
you're interested in this stage and wanting to know more, there is a lot of documentation out there on the internet. I suggest that if you love music, learn about this stage because like Jello Biafra, for example, this is a very important stage. Like Freya said, this is his last quality check. This is the last time he can ensure that it sounds the way we want it to sound. So to that effect, let's talk about why we remaster things. Why bother remastering? Because for example,
uh,
for Lard, The
yeah,
Last Temptation of Reed, and for Power of Lard, one of the big holdups at one point is that Jello pulled the plug and wanted to remaster everything all over again
yeah.
from what we were working
We
on. So
also,
when
yeah, we've
people were
remastered
waiting
quite
for
a
this
few things
record,
here of late. Some of it is we've lost the mother or the original master to some degree. So um a lot of the vinyl masters, like, we may have like we have the tapes that were mastered from, and those kind of get set into a file, and hopefully that file has lived on to some degree. But when they're going direct to lacquer, it's not so much like they're saving a digit, like it's not so much like as easy to get like a mastered version as it is to just have like a wave file stream like for that we need for digital. It's not truly the same. They will be, the output is technically the same for, and a vinyl master is usually side A and side B, and then whatever other sides there are if there are multiple records. But realistically, it's usually something was wrong with the original, like it wasn't good when we repressed it, or any number of things could have happened during that time.
Or a
Um,
version of it. Like, I mean,
yeah,
there's one record, I think, like Power of Lard, for example.
yeah.
Jello does not feel that all versions of that record are equal.
Or like
Uh,
several other ones. Or not Last Temptation. Last Temptation of Reed. There was one that we did that might have been remastered from a wave file or something like. There's a few things like that where we were having issues with like
it
these
was
things, and we did
remastered
not
from a
have.
CD, something. I
Yeah,
don't know if it was that one, but there was a Lard release
yeah,
that Jello maintains that he feels that it was populated from a CD burn
yeah,
and wasn't given so a digital.
yeah,
So it didn't sound, he felt that those versions of those records in retrospect felt not as deep. And he feels like it was done like the staff at the time thought that it was fine, but
yeah.
he hadn't actually cleared it. So now he clears everything, which he
Yeah,
should,
he should. It's
but
his. Yeah,
he's not fast.
like he's not fast. No, there's things that are waiting that I'm waiting on him currently for him doing like. And it's hard to be like, I need you to listen to these things and sit down, because you have to like sit down and pretty much listen to the entire thing. It's not like, so I mean, you
Yeah.
have a link, and like it's sometimes easier when it's a shorter album, but like when you're listening to 30 minutes of music and you're sitting there critically listening to it, and it's not necessarily like I'm sitting and just listen. It's like sitting and just listening for the most part. It's not
Yeah,
like
this
you're
isn't
trying to
like on your
actually,
phone. You can't just be on
yeah,
your phone talking to people. You have to listen to every when you're reviewing this music, like just so everyone knows, you're not just sitting there going like, "Yeah, sounds okay." Like, no, you have to listen to everything, the
yeah, it's
whole
not.
record.
Yeah, and it's not like, yeah, so I'm not like, it's also one of those things when I sit here and like listen to even test pressings, like I usually listen to everything fully through, and it usually like I can sort of do something like it's usually like very minimal something I can potentially do to even, but that's usually I'm listening for like, at that point I'm listening for like any hisses or pops, or a scratch here or there. Like we're at the point where I'm usually just like listening for some things that might be imperfections in the processing of getting there. But um yeah, for mastering it's like really wanting to sit down and like listen intently, and for like any kind of things in there, because this is our last before, especially for vinyl, this is our last stop basically. Like there's another one with the test pressing, but like by that time we've played it and we've done other stuff, so we have spent a bit more money, so we're not able to go, and it's not able to go back and just, that means we're going back and plating, and we're cutting a lacquer again, we're doing other stuff, so it's a little bit more involved than just being like, oh, like, well, it's for CD, so like let's just go change the master really quick, or like something like
No,
that. It's not
it's this is a big step, at least at
yeah,
Alternative Tentacles, and I think at a number of other, especially the
I would,
boutique labels, it's an
yeah,
important. If you
I think
love music and you work on music, this is an important step.
I,
And it only becomes more important the older you get. You realize how critical it is for what you want, the artist wants to convey, be conveyed correctly and
I
properly.
I will say, this is something when I first got into music I didn't even like really know about, and I feel like a lot, it's not as, I feel like in the general, like not to say like the general public, or like I feel like even like younger musicians, it's not really thought of as something. Like there was a lot of tools for a while that were like, oh, we'll just have AI master it, or we'll have like this kind of like thing that will scrub it and it'll master things. And I'm like, it was like some of those things that, and you start like seeing comparisons between those, or a human, like someone that actually knows what they're doing, has been trained to do this. It's a specific job, like besides being just a mix engineer, it's a whole different set of tools and a different setup entirely, usually, or a room setup entirely different.
I would
So it,
highly not
yeah.
recommend using AI
Oh
to do
yeah,
this.
no.
Like here's why.
Yeah.
Because while AI can do a lot, and my feelings towards its impact and creativity is not is neither here nor there.
Yeah.
That's a whole another discussion, and that could be a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, a side note, we got called out by somebody politely about using AI. Jello posted an AI graphic recently, and people were like, "Could you not do that?" And I'm
He's
like,
not the best at catching some of those
he
things, and
doesn't.
to be honest, when I know that when like you or I are like looking at them, I don't necessarily always catch them like either when he's just being like, here, post this, and I'm like,
I didn't think about it because it's what Jello wants to express. Like I knew it was AI, but
yeah,
I
it's
was like,
the
this is him expressing himself. I'm not going to sit there and go, Jello, you can't use this. Find another graphic. He doesn't. He's not going to do that. Like, but at the same time, when somebody wrote like, could you not use AI? It's like, yeah, I get it, and of course, I feel very similar. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what to tell you when, I'm not going to make my I'm not going to make him look for a different image. But he
yeah,
doesn't do that often, but it was just this recent time. But anyway, I
yeah,
wouldn't recommend AI to do this because while you can program it to hit all the highs and lows and the peaks, and you can tell it to clean up things, and you can tell it a lot, and it could get, and I'm sure it could do a serviceable job. But so much of this is feel, and you can't put a placement on that, and that's what's going to make something different. Like, does this part come up? Like, does this part feel like the climactic impact of the song? That's why a good mastering person is so crucial, because the ability to sense where these songs are going and how to interpret is never going to work on an on a mathematical equation, because there's no way to explain it. It and anyone who's like shrugging this off, which I don't feel like any of the music fans really would. I think they understand feel.
yeah.
Things just feel right, feel wrong, feel
I think it'd be
you're
the
not.
same thing with like trying to have like a like I mean, sure, maybe at some point I could get there and same with mixing or some other thing or whoever, whatever. But it's like to me, it's like that human element like really does make a difference. The same thing. It's like about like and the whole to be honest, like art is about having that human need like that touch to it. And like I really do like appreciate having those different touch points and the different people who have touch a record over the time, they do impact it. Like you can definitely tell, like, and that's the reason at the Grammys there is mastering engineers that are celebrated. There's like Grammys for
Separately.
a lot of like there's a lot of Grammys that don't get on like, and not that I guess we really participate in any of that necessarily, but like as someone that has before or has like friends that have, it's one of those things that is like really I learned about a lot of different parts of the music industry that get celebrated in that way that I'm like, oh yeah, I never really thought about that being like something that like you could win a Grammy for, but it's really cool that you can. Um
Yeah.
and neat. And it's nice to see other people get celebrated for those kinds of things or those albums that they worked really hard for and they did make a difference in. Sometimes you can definitely I've definitely heard some mixed albums and heard the mastered versions afterwards. I'm like, yeah, that does sound
It it
way better.
It really
um
does. It really does make a
yeah.
difference. So once we have the mastered, all right, so boom, we mastered it. We've gotten through it. Jello finally came out to the studio and sat through it and listened to it and approved it. Or we got a mastering track back, and now we have it mastered for vinyl. We have it mastered for digital and CD, and the artist approved. Everybody loves it. Now what? How
Yeah.
does this happen? Like,
Usually, then the mastering engineer will send it off to a place, either to a few different places. There's only a few in the United States that still do this,
yeah, that's the wild part that I
which is
wanted
the
you to drop.
which is the wild part. But also, like, so for vinyl, like for digital, usually it'll come to us. Like, so then we submit it to a few different places that we use for CDs, and we kind of get through that. Right now,
Yeah, it
we've
takes
been
about a CD takes about, I would say,
a
about a
couple months,
month. Yeah,
month to a couple months, depending on what it is, and like some things are more complicated.
yeah. So
Some
CDs
of
are
the ones,
generally straightforward. We upload it onto generally the site of the plant that's doing it, and
yeah,
then in a month or a couple months it'll come out. But we have to make sure that gets done in time, and we do have to, if we're doing CD versions, we do
yeah.
have to consider that. Just as a side note, when to release and put stuff through a distributor, digital takes about at least 2 weeks, and that's pushing it. Better to say about a month to be fully distributed, to give a month to fully distribute it out to every different format of streaming
It
channel.
goes fast. Like our distributor, we can get it done quicker than that. Some of it is just submission through like the different processes takes a minute, but I've definitely had things corrected and gone up pretty quickly sometimes. But it's just kind of dependent, and giving them the a longer timeline is usually better than trying to be like, can you do this tomorrow? Because I've had,
Yeah, because it takes a minute to get everywhere.
yeah,
But so those two. Those two are very
yeah.
straightforward. CDs are burned
But
and everything else. But the records are so when they send it off to the one of the few plants that played it.
yeah, that's basically what happens. So they cut a lot. So you get the master done basically. The mastering engineer usually the same person that cuts the lacquer. Most, at least everyone that we work with has the ability to cut a lacquer. Otherwise, otherwise they send the master to the plant or to their preferred place to do that and cut the lacquer, and that gets sent off for plating, and they handle
And
that.
that's a piece of a circular shaped like a record piece of
Yeah,
lacquer that is literally cut by a needle to
yeah,
put in the grooves that would make the sound, the mastered sound. And then
so
they use that.
yeah. Basically, if you ever heard of like a lathe cut record, or anything like that, or you've heard of, basically the lathe is what they use to cut the lacquer, which is acetate or something like it's not, I forget what it is specifically, but it is a cut piece that goes, it's resilient enough to go and get plated, but it's basically a lost process. It's a lost wax process
Yeah,
essentially.
we lose that
Yeah.
that thing goes away in the
Right.
making of the when they make the mold. Just so
Yeah.
everyone knows, if at any part of this that you feel like we're not explaining correctly, you can write us. But honestly, we do want to let everyone know we're just kind of giving you an idea of what we're
Yeah,
going
this is
through
like
for
the
each record. This is the penny version. That each of these processes could get an entire episode of a podcast dedicated to the process and the things to think about and
yeah.
the things that can go wrong at each step. But we're just trying to give you an overview. So, okay, so we've
Yeah.
made the lacquer. It's then that's sent to someone who can make
The
what?
mother and father, or the mothers basically. So those get, like, the top and the bottom basically get plated around the lacquer, and those create basically the reverse of that, which is used to make stampers. Um,
See, this is a
so
part that used to confuse me
yeah.
forever. The stampers versus the mother and the father. Because I would
Yep.
be like, what's a mother and father and what's wait, like I would have thought that when you make a mold you're
Yep.
making the stampers from the lacquer, but then people would refer to mothers, and so for a long time as a musician I was confused about these terms.
Yeah, and they are like similar in that, like, you basically get the reverse, and then you get another, basically a copy of that, which is your stampers, which is what you need, which is what you're using actually in the press, which is, those are like nickel, I think they're usually nickel plated, for going in there. It will withstand high heat, and pressure, because that's what they're under for making a record.
And the
So
stampers are made to go on the literal machine. So
yep,
the mother and
they
father
go on a
are
mold.
the impressions that come from the lacquer itself, and then those are used to help create the stampers that are the two sides of the record, right? That you
Yeah.
pour when you do vinyl, the vinyl is in between those stampers. And we've run into issues in the past, just so for people to know, one of the struggles is where we'll go in and think that we're looking at a mother and father, which is what you need to make stampers, but then we find out we have stampers, not a mother and father. The
Yeah.
problem here is that a stamper won't always go on, like a stamper from the 90s won't necessarily or very rarely fit on a machine of now. And
Yeah.
two, stampers wear out. So we have stampers that have a number of uses written on it. Like it's made this many records, and it's
Yeah.
like it might not be able to make anymore. So boom, if you
Yeah.
don't have those files, which they weren't always files before. That's the other thing for people to remember, just to review. So
Yeah.
back in the 90s and 80s, you're not going to have an audio file, a digital
Yeah.
file to use for the mastered version of this album. You had a lacquer that went to make a mother and father. That mother and father, if you have them, can make more stampers. But stampers, if you only have those, won't always fit on a machine, a
Yeah.
different machine than the one they were made for because it may not be around
I've also
anymore.
run
And
into that
two,
problem where we've had them make it for the wrong plant or the wrong machine that the plant has, or something like that has happened, where I know we had that happen with a release once
yeah,
where I
they made the
it ended up
wrong
being,
kind of stamper, so it
yeah,
wouldn't work.
and so
But
that's,
but But yeah, but that's boom. Like if we don't, so we think we have the mother and fa father,
Yeah.
so we can make stampers. But then we don't. We just have a pair of stampers. But the stampers are useless because they've been used to shit, and they're not
Yeah.
going to fit any machine that anyone we know. They look at it and go, "Nah, that won't work."
Yeah.
And
Or
boom, you have to remaster the record
yeah.
because we don't have access to the master that you once heard. So that's
Yeah.
one of the key reasons when you hear about labels remastering records, sometimes that's why, because we can't recreate records with that same master anymore if you've run out of the stampers. And
Yeah.
pressing plants go out of business, places change, people buy stuff. I don't know where certain machines ended up. Like the machines that we used at one pressing plant might be at another, but I don't know where. None of us
Yeah.
do.
And it's
So
also there's also a lot of things with like I mean, usually I know like the last when we do multiple colorways or anything like that, we're usually ordering a set of stampers for each colorway. We're also like
good
expecting to
point.
run through several pairs of stampers per run, depending on how many thousands of records there are and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things like that where they wear out, like things will definitely change. I mean, they're going under intense heat and pressure. It's kind of an unexpected thing that you're putting like a lot of stress on these things that they're going to wear out. They're meant to wear out
They're
basically. They're
finite.
not meant to be a forever. That's why you have the mother and the father that you try and keep pristine as possible. And like stuff does happen to them in the plating process sometimes, or things
They
like
they get
if it
destroyed.
gets pocked, like a pock mark in it, if it gets plating stuff that got stuck to it potentially, or anything like
Stored
that,
badly
stored poorly, you have
on its
corrosion
side.
stuff that can happen to things like that. Yeah, there's all kinds of things that can happen. They can get warped. They're also not exactly the most like you'd be surprised. Like they're not exactly like some like rigid piece of like crazy. Like they can just get bent. Like I've like or something crazy can happen to it.
Easily.
Um,
And a lot of these records that Alternative Tentacles is dealing with that you guys all want us to repress and you wonder why things are taking so long. Welcome to the reason why things are taking so long. We did make the mistake of try and tell you about a bunch of records before they were done, and we had hoped that that process would move smoothly. But when you're
yeah.
running into these kind of mistakes, that's why we stopped telling you guys about stuff because
Oh
the
yeah.
reason these things are taking so long. And then you have in the added thing if Jello steps in and he goes, I don't like these two albums sounding, I want to restart the mastering process.
We even
I
had
I don't
that like that's part of the reason Virus 60 Dad's Revenge. Like we were gonna I was literally going to repress it pretty much like before we even ran out of it. And then what happened like basically he was like, I didn't like the whatever the last master was of it or whatever for the last cut of that. And so we had to go recut that entirely. And he was like, would not let me reorder it until he recut it. And I was like, well, then this has to sit until we can get Sex Mad done, and because it's on this, it's they're both on the same reels.
yeah,
So
that's
the
why
only
there
thing that
hasn't
I have
been more
access
Dad Revenge.
to get those out of is that mastering those mastering
Yeah, that's
reels.
why that
So
7 inch came out and it was great and we were really excited about it. But when Jello wasn't really happy with how it sounded and thought he could do better, thought we
yeah,
could do better, we go back to the drawing board
and
and
that's also part of it is like when you start talking about it not it being just the tape and there not being a file, like it that one had gotten through lacquering and plating and everything like that, and we could have reused those at the plant, but we also didn't like them. So basically we would have had to start over pretty much from cutting a new lacquer, which could have been possible if it wasn't just a mix problem or something. It wasn't just a mastering problem from the beginning. It was just an issue with the mother or the any kind of thing that happened. But if that's the case, then like you would just cut a new lacquer. But we didn't have that ability to do that straight from just having those there. We had to go back and do the master again to get those basically back into a separate entity again and everything like that. So going
it's a
forward, it
lot.
should be a problem, assuming knock on wood, nothing happens to Anne. Nothing happens to Anne Marie, and we're those kinds of things. So,
It's tough
but
to
yeah.
try and explain to people, like it's such a process. Like we
Mhm.
have Alternative Tentacles, as a side note, Alternative Tentacles has more records in production in various stages than I think we have ever had. And a lot of it
Probably,
is the
yeah.
represses and you mix in the new releases. We've released an astounding number of records so far this year, if you can, counting the represses.
Yeah, that have
And
come out. Yeah.
yeah, and we got a lot more coming. And it's
Yes.
just crazy. So it's like this, so each one of these records for everybody know listening, each of these projects, each one has this process. And
Yeah.
each one can run into problems anywhere along any at any point along the way. And the
Yeah.
lard records that a lot of people are still waiting on, which is the last of the great pre-orders, what's taking so long is because
Yeah.
you have the singer who's just not happy
Yeah.
with it, and he has to be. And so we have to take it on the chin. I mean, it's still a priority. It's coming out. You're all going to get it. If you're listening and you have a
Yeah.
pre-order, 100% you're going to get it. But like when you have somebody who's we were pretty far along in the process when he decided to pull the plug. But, as annoying as that can be, it's still better that we come out with something we can use for a longer term because
Oh yeah.
now once he does that, then it's less likely to cause these problems because we will have the master file digitally,
Yeah.
even the vinyl digital master, so that we can recreate the mothers and the fathers to create them more stampers to make your records.
Yeah, and it's also like I've done a lot of stuff that I've tried to do behind the scenes, a lot of documenting where these things are and like how, like what we have and what we don't have. And so like even with like art recreation and things like that or other stuff that like we've been working on, there's a lot of stuff like having that all very organized has been one of my goals that going forward, like, you
And
know,
it's a
for myself a
substantial
lot of the
effort.
time is because I hate when I have to go like spend 30 minutes to an hour sometimes digging for something and I'm like, well, that should have been easy to find. Why didn't I just take or whoever take the time to just put it someplace and like document where it is? And like you just don't it's something that I like picking it up from like working in tech a little bit and other places like that or IT of like document the process and document where everything is for a project so that way you can like go back and reference it and basically create like these like master docs about like okay, here's this project. I've been trying to get there for a lot of these things and so that makes it a lot easier to be able to go see, like where is the art and thankfully or where is the files, like do we have like this is something that came up recently with trying to do a CD. Do we have the WAV files? They're not in the Dropbox. And it's like, well, why aren't they in the Dropbox? Like that should have been where they were. Like we've had this for a long time, so they never made it there. But that's just another thing that happens sometimes when, we had a CD of it sitting on the shelf. So like everyone's like, that's good enough. And it's not
It's
always going
not.
forward.
It's not.
So
There's a lot of with Alternative Tentacles. When I stepped into
yeah.
AT the first time, I was shocked at how just I don't want to say disorganized, but I would definitely say many different levels of organization stacked upon each other that didn't necessarily work together. So
And
when you had different eras calling back to different things with the presumption that that's there. For example, there was a general manager who was a great general manager, great person,
yeah,
great, did a great job for years. But there was a presumption that I feel in their record keeping for these masters that the companies that we worked with would be around. And their plan would have worked great and their level of organization would have worked great if those companies stayed in. But almost every single company they worked with, not every, some of them are still going, but almost every company they worked with are gone.
yeah. And I
And
think it's
therefore, a lot of our things that were stored there, with the presumption that we would just continually go back to them to repress, are gone.
But I also get that. I mean, like as someone that has to deal with like a lot of our production and other things like that, like it's the easy way out is just assume that they have it and hopefully and like that they're gonna stay in business, especially when you're so like during certain parts of AT, it's been very lean and very like you kind of just have to like especially like as a GM, you may be one of the only people here, and you're handling, a lot of different things when it's been very lean. And thankfully, you know, during my tenure here, I've been able to grow the team and do other things like that. And we've been able to, do a few things that have been very beneficial to us having, a lot more
And it
hands to be able to do
fluctuates.
more stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it fluctuates. Like,
So,
our
but
winter, I'll tell people, our
yeah.
winter time is really a lot leaner than our spring and summer,
Oh yeah. I
you
mean,
know?
and even then, sometimes like I mean, right now, like there's things that I'm always like looking into the future for, of making sure like, like certain releases do attract more people to buy our records, but also like there's a wider economic and political stuff going on that is insanity, and that could cause other things to happen, especially for us. Like that's,
I mean, not to go after any particular thing right this second, but I will tell you that regardless of where you sit, you're spending less, and we can
yeah.
tell. And like
I
a
mean, like,
lot of us can tell. Like we can
yeah.
tell that all of you are spending less money on luxury items like records.
Used to. Like records are luxury. Like I mean, like yeah. I mean, like even working in music, like I mean, I consider them a luxury item. They're something that like if it's between that and buying groceries, people are going to choose to buy groceries. If it's not a necessity, unfortunately, like
This-
we have access to digital versions of things. We have access to all kinds of stuff. So if we wanted to, and we definitely appreciate the support. I love when people like buy our records and I get to see people post about them and all that kind of stuff. Like it's amazing. But I also understand when people have a hard time doing that or can't necessarily do that. And
I get
that's
it.
I totally understand it. Like as someone like working in the music industry and someone that likes collecting records, it's like there's certain things that like I know that even for me, like buying especially used ones or anything like that, like there's a whole different scenario with like certain ones that I've definitely looked at and just been like, nope, that's not happening. And I guess I'm just not going to own that record until somebody decides to repress it. I mean, like speaking of, like No Means No Wrong was like, I think the red version, the 10th anniversary, the 2010 10th anniversary or something like that version, or that version of it was like $250 for a solid red copy, which is insane. Like, not that it's insane because it's worth that much, but it's just like that to me is something that I would never like. I know people that do. I know tons of people that that have that ability to use that, and I think that's amazing. And that's more of a priority for them maybe than it is for me for certain things like that. But like that is definitely a record that like I was extremely excited for more people to get in more people's hands, just because it was like going from being able to get a copy for $250 to being able to get a copy for $25, or $30. Like that's a much more reasonable expense for a lot of people, and even then it's sometimes a little bit much too. Like I totally understand that being
Oh,
the case too for
I had
some
to
people.
defend us raising
So
prices, and we just
yeah.
raised prices to the market. But they were
Yeah.
like, "Why are you charging more for a record that you used to have out for $10 and now you're charging 25?" And it's like,
Yeah.
"Look, man, I didn't set like we didn't want to raise the prices and we held off for the longest time to the point
Oh
where
yeah.
we have continually found gaps where we have been hurting because we did not match market. And it
Yeah,
sucks.
it does.
But
And I'm like,
I
I
mean,
want to,
we're
yeah. And I've also fluctuated with our prices too. Like, I think there's some that I've definitely gone back and lowered or done other things with as I've seen demand or different things change, or we've done sales um and stuff like that too. Like we just earlier 2 months ago, I guess at this point, did like a massive sale where I mean we put everything on like extreme discount. You could have gotten three records for sometimes the price of one and stuff like that for certain things.
mhm.
I put it as cheaply as like possible to get a lot of our older stock to move,
And it
um,
worked. And
and it
now we're
works.
getting ready to redo the warehouse in a way that we can actually move around because the amount of records that we have coming in
Yeah.
are it's insane. It's like a maze of boxes right now, everybody. It's
It
tough.
is. It's the one thing that I'm excited to get the warehouse back in order a little bit more, is to get like I mean it's always going to be kind of in this fluctuation right now for a bit, but it's being able to have things or get like just little useful like everyday life things where it doesn't feel like navigating a maze all the time, and it does feel like we have usable space there, and it's not just seas of boxes as much as it sort of normally is too. But like that's
I
just one of those
mean,
things where we don't have a huge warehouse. I think we've been around for 46 years basically at this point, so
it's
which is
wild.
wild. But like we have we're probably at the max of where we can be at the warehouse that we're currently at to some degree. We're kind of getting to the point where that's not the case, like where we'll if we keep growing and growing and keep having more and more stock at some point, that's another thing down the line to think about. But it
It's
is
gonna change things. Like, yeah, because
we've done pretty well at this one place, and I do love the place. Like the place that we're at does suit us very well. It's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, at some point when growing and trying to keep a 46-year-old label that's been independent the entire time, and like it's kind of it's nice to see it growing. Like I still feel like we're still in like a place where we're doing a lot to continue like getting reissues back out, new artists trying to deal with a million other things. But it's been nice getting back out there. And even though I think we retreated a little bit from when I first started, and was like trying to do everything. I was like, we'll go to punk rock bowling, I'll do all this other stuff, and it was like that's awesome. And we're starting to get more of our artists again out there, and as they're doing stuff, and that's kind of where we're trying to capitalize again, is like helping that, and also just looking at other ways that we can help capitalize and market our artists and get these reissues back out, especially for artists that necessarily aren't always touring, or other things like that too. So, or the ones that are. So I'm excited for some of the stuff that is coming out soon. And
Yeah, I mean, because a lot
so,
of the stuff has been, this has been a complicated. So, as you all understand
yeah,
from our stories, this has been a very complicated road to get a record to that point. And keep in mind that the thing we haven't said is once we've gotten it to the pressing plant, and that's presuming that all the art is ready, all the art has been updated, because sometimes we have art that we can use, but it still needs to be redone because it
yeah,
needs to be updated for the text and information of now, not of 10, 20
yeah,
or more
copyright,
years
all that kind
ago.
of information that
Yeah,
needs to
that's all
be.
changed. So sometimes we have to redo a lot of that record. Now, that takes about anywhere from 3 months when everything goes great
Yeah,
to 6 months when things are a little more backed up to even a year has been
yeah,
the longest I've had to deal with is one full year to get a pressing plant to return the record. Right
yeah,
at the point I was about to pull the record from them, they sent it. And that was I'll tell everyone because it's been a long time. That was the Spindrift
yeah,
uh, record that we did. I love that record. It took a year, full year, but it was kind
yeah,
of during the pandemic. It ran into every problem. It ran into the fact that the people who make the lacquer, there's only two companies in the world, and one of them burned down.
yeah,
And so it was all from Japan. And so it was like trying to find lacquer to actually cut the lacquer. And then the pressing plant was way backed up. And so, but people didn't know about it because it was just this poor band trying to wait for their record to come out. And it took so long.
yeah. And like now it's definitely better, like, but it can take a while. And also there's other factors of like, like there's so many pressing plants, there's a lot of them, but there's only so many that we can work with at the same time. There's only so much that I can handle having to navigate, and especially with
And there's only so much money.
there's only so much
This
money
is
too. Yeah,
expensive.
we're not flush by any means. Like we're not a huge. I think I don't know. I don't know how people think that, but we're not like there's not that many of us. Like the team has grown since I took over, but not like
AT
in a
has
crazy
grown,
amount.
but
Yeah,
it has expanded and
yeah,
decreased
and also
due to
like
market and time and
doing records are is not cheap either. Like I mean, it's never been I think the cheapest form of anything, but like I mean
what's
when
what's a good like just to give people so another thing
yeah,
is that just to touch on this real quick.
sure,
Jello complains about this all the time. When they were doing this many years ago, they had this net 90-day thing, which is
yeah,
crazy that they had it. So they would be able to pay for the records. They would make the records at the pressing plant, but wouldn't have to pay for those records until by the time they had the bill due, they were getting paid from the distributor for the records that shipped for release. So that first day that it came out, they get a check, and then that goes to the pressing plant. Everybody's happy. But pressing plants don't work like that anymore. They haven't worked
no.
like that for a long time. They don't give any of that. You have to
Some
give
of
it
them are
all
much
in
nicer to
advance.
us than others about when things can be due, but or whether
They are
and stuff like
nice
that.
to
And
us.
our we've
Mostly
had
because we our name and how long we've been around, and we're lucky for
and I'm
that. But
very
like,
lucky to have cultivated some of the relationships, and they know that we're good for the money and that we're going to pay them. Like there's a lot of things like that that I've done to make sure that we can keep doing some of these things every so often, and I usually try not to abuse that or anything like
right?
that
Because
with them
it's
because
very tentative and it can be lost
oh yeah, no,
very
like it's
easily.
it's one of those things where yeah. I also like I mean they're people too. I understand they have to pay bills. Like they've got to do all the same things that we have to do.
But to give people an idea, let's
Yeah,
do a small amount. Like,
sure.
do you have in mind, like, just a rough idea, like
Yeah,
for 1,000 records?
for a
What's a
thousand rec
rough? This is
thousand
not a.
black records is probably if it's 12 inches, it's probably like 3 to 5, depending on anything else in there. Like and
That's
depending
what
on
I was
like
gonna say. Three to
yeah.
five thousand dollars, depending on how many bells and whistles are applied to that.
Yeah, like that's
And
yeah. There's
yeah,
kind of it can get like I mean it can go up from there. I mean I can spend
1,000 records, just so everyone knows, that is the bare minimum of what we will press for any one thing. And
yeah.
honestly, I don't can't think of a release recently that we've only done 1,000 of. Like 7 inches, yes, but like full album, but like 1,000 records is
Not
nothing.
usually, because I also do the Patreon since we're doing the Patreon stuff and some of the other things, like most of those add another like 400 copies or so onto it. So like
So it
of the
goes up.
black, like we've done some things, some of the orders that I've had in have been closer to 1,000 of black, but usually like that's not like most of the time our orders are getting closer to like 15 to 20 grand or so, if not more, depending on print parts and everything
That
else like
have
that.
to be
Because
paid before or
yeah,
well within the
yeah,
shipping to us date. So, like, keep in mind, everybody, like, Jello funds this and we fund it from
true.
your sales and your
Yeah.
digital downloads
And
and
our
everything else. Like,
distributor and stuff like that. Like that, I mean, it's yeah, it's always a constant juggle, especially as the orders get bigger because there is more demand for certain releases, and those orders are much larger, and we spend a lot of money on them because when you're doing several different colorways and you're trying to make sure those maximize and get like you can like there's also different price breaks at certain points, so you're trying to make sure and you're that you have them but also that they don't go out of stock immediately, hopefully, because you don't want to just have to repress it immediately after you already sold everything.
it's
um
tough, and it's a
yeah,
balance that you have to walk that AT has always walked, but
yeah,
it can be more precarious if you're not careful. And
oh yeah,
having that's why I put so much emphasis when I talk to people about like how much AT is doing right now, because
yeah,
we're not only repressing old records, we're also putting out new records. And when you balance those together, that's a
yeah,
tremendous amount of effort. Like, I would probably suggest that a label, even our size, puts out 2 records a quarter at most.
yeah. I mean, realistically, I mean, I would love for us to some at some point be big enough to do like one release a month, but like that's realistically a little bit different. But and we tried getting there, but it's also that's a heavy pace to run at too.
It's a heavy pace.
It requires a few more people than we have to do that consistently. Um,
Yeah, because yeah, for
you need the band,
all
you need
parts.
yeah, you need the people hours to just do that and not to
Yeah,
crush
for
anyone under the
art,
weight of
for
it.
the actual
So
shipping, for the interaction with, there's so much, and there's so much more that we will talk about on future episodes that
yeah,
we're kind of hinting at, like about. But like, since this has just been focused on, okay, we've dug out the records, now we
yeah,
have it. What is the process, and what is
yeah,
mastering? What are fathers and mothers? What are stampers? What is the turnaround time? And what exactly is the rough cost to
yeah.
do 1,000 records? Then and pay that in advance. And like I said, we're not really dealing with only 1,000 records at
Yeah,
this
and usually
point.
like I mean like they're like I've had it also fluctuates sometimes too. Like our sometimes things are our distributor wants more initially, and so like and sometimes I know that better earlier on when we're placing orders, and sometimes that changes too depending on like when we place the order versus when it comes out, and
Yeah.
how things could be different during those times or
Because
whether
they change
someone
their minds.
yeah.
They'll say like, nah, and then they'll be
Or I
like, oh
mean
wait,
like
we need all of these.
yeah, or like things, like times change. Like, I mean, when it takes several months to get some stuff, sometimes it'll be like, well, we wanted this many, but now we only need this many, or sometimes we need more. Sometimes it's like, oh, actually, when we were able to talk to shops about this, they really do want it. And it's like, you could have told me that a little bit before, then I would have been able to order more. And like, there's different things like that where it's just, the market changes, things happen and sometimes we try to be our best about anticipating demand for I like this was like recently with like even Brujeria. I'm like, I think I under ordered those both because I was like, I didn't think that they like I thought they were going to do well, but I didn't know how much of a reception they would get necessarily from that.
Yeah,
And then was
you
like,
ordered you
oh,
ordered a lot. I mean, I don't want to say that like, but
yeah,
like, but it's
it
more than we
yeah,
thought.
but it was more than I thought that we were gonna get. And I was like, I guess I'm gonna try and reorder these like pretty soon because that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. Is like you're like, oh, okay, like this will last us, and then it's like, actually that won't last us.
Hmm.
I usually prefer that problem to when we've had to sit on records for years and stuff like that, where it's just like that's also another thing is like when it's like having records sit around forever just means that they're costing us, over time, basically, like because we're not selling them and we're not using those. They're just, it's funds that are sitting there basically.
It's funds that are
Um,
tied up in these pile
yeah,
of records that's just sitting there and not going anywhere and taking
yeah.
up space in the warehouse. And it's hard because like each record is somebody's
Oh yeah.
dream. You know,
There's
you're taking a creative process that took a monumental effort to make, and then when it just sits there, I don't.
several releases, like even like Virus 250 that we have so like that we've had so many copies over. Like I'm like the record's not bad. It's just
No,
not
Becker's great.
just
Virus 250,
yeah.
the world,
The no WTO combo.
no
It
WTO combo. Somebody at one point in AT's history ordered a massive amount of that record.
yeah.
So we have so it's the amount we have now is nothing compared to when I was first introduced to the amount because I've gone through so many through sales and stuff, and it's a great record. It's a great
Yeah.
release with like super cool people on it. I mean, we're talking Kim Thrall of Soundgarden, Jello's on it, obviously, Chris Novosek. So you got
Yeah.
Nirvana, Soundgarden, Dead Kennedys getting together, and the rhythm section of Sweet 75. It's really cool, but there's just so many of them.
Yeah. There's things like that where that's happened in the past or where it's been like or things have gone really well and you're like, okay, this is going to do well. And then like it either flops or you like like there are things that happened in the early 2000s that like changed a lot of different things for like the way that we operated and stuff like that. So like I totally understand that like there's a bunch of factors here that like for several releases that like we had sitting around and I was just like I was very glad to see like we took a big chunk out of several of them when we did the last sale, and we've done it in previous sales too. But it's just like I want them to be out there. I don't want them to, like sitting in our warehouse does nothing for
Right.
me. Or for anyone. I would rather people be listening to the music and be enjoying it and having it in their collection or any number of things like, or hopefully exposing somebody to something new like that they were like, oh, I picked this up because it's like this price for or it's cheaper. But like that's the things to me that I'm like excited about because there's even AT bands that like I'll discover. I think it was like Pilot Scott Tracy. I heard a song come up on for me randomly on like Spotify and someplace, and I was like, wait, this is one of our releases. Like I was like, dang, like, and it was one that
They're
I'm
great.
pretty sure I've listened to a while ago, but it was one of those things that came up, and I was like, oh, dang, this is like, oh, I need to go like look at who this is. And I didn't even put together that it was them until after I was looking at who it was, and I was like, oh, this is this release.
When I
But
I came here, when I started working here, I found out that Saturn Flea Collar had a release, and I remembered being a kid
yeah.
at their show, and that record was it was like a release tour, release
Oh
show,
wow,
and I bought that record while they were there, and then I didn't know because I was really young and I
yeah,
didn't pay attention like this, but it was surprised me. I was like, "Oh, that was an Alternative Tentacles record. We have that record in our discography." It was
yeah,
so, it's a it's an amazing discography. None of the records I yeah, you said it best. Like the WTO no WTO combo is a very important historic record. I just think that
yeah.
somebody along the line saw Nirvana and Soundgarden and decided to order Nirvana and Soundgarden like numbers to be ready for that.
Oh yeah,
And a number of things occurred that is a long story that had nothing to do with the quality of the record or the
yeah,
popularity. We've sold a ton of these. I just want to emphasize that record
yeah.
has done very well. It's just that somebody ordered a lot and a number of things happened that made it so that we still have in 2025, I mean, it originally came out in 1999, and in 2025, we still have quite a lot of that record, both on CD, more on CD than vinyl,
Yeah, there's
but it's a lot
yeah.
of CDs. I think it's really the CDs that are out of control. And it's a great,
Yeah.
important record that I encourage if you're listening, you
Oh
haven't
yeah.
gotten it. Like what we're talking about is nothing. It's just literally interpreting the market and the ability to get those records to people. Keep in mind, CDs are not selling like they used to. So
Yeah.
any of our
I'm also
CD stock.
yeah, I'm also surprised. Like some people like really want CDs, and like it's so funny because like all of us have different opinions on like CDs or digital or vinyl. Even here at AT, like I think it's
Mhm.
hilarious because John will be like, no one buys CDs anymore, and I'm like, it, people do. Like if I look at the numbers,
People,
people do obviously buy them. Like it's
they
not
do.
like I mean I don't really buy them, but that's also because I usually listen to everything digitally when I do that, or I'll usually buy vinyl or I'll buy a cassette usually because I have a cassette player in my car and I also just kind of like the novelty of them still.
I mean, it's not
Um,
selling at the level it once
yeah,
did, or selling at the level of like if you're ordering for
yeah,
globally to make
oh
sure
yeah,
there's a record, there's a CD in every warehouse and tower of music in the world at the time in
oh yeah. There's not,
1999. It's not those numbers, but it's still selling. Though,
yeah.
like I talk to people and they're like, nobody, I don't know anyone right off the hand that listens to CDs, but like, yeah, they're still moving.
I mean,
But
like even like having like younger people come at or like come up to us at live events and stuff like that. They'd be like, "Do you have this on CD?" And I'd be like, I didn't even think to bring it on C. Like, why would I brought like we might have it at the warehouse, but like, why did I didn't think to bring it every CD that we had because most of the time when I go to live events, half the time it's they just sit there, and other times they'll be like, okay, like people will really want them, and I'm like,
well, it's
killing
it's
me.
it's interesting to try and predict that
Yeah.
market. But I think
Oh yeah.
I think this episode has given a pretty good overview of the struggles of the production of
Yeah.
making a record and what it takes and the difficulties. And it gives a little bit sheds a little bit light on like the two releases that people are waiting for, which
Yeah.
people are about to be a lot happier about one of those. But
Yes.
like so that's really exciting in
I'm
terms
excited
of
about that.
things that have long been sitting. But I really appreciate you taking the time today, Freya, to be on the episode, and I look forward to more discussions about how we what goes on in making this whole thing possible. I mean, there's a lot more
Yeah.
things to talk about.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of things.
I did get a request that somebody would like an episode. I got a couple requests that people
Cool.
would like us to tell the story of how No Means No came back to Alternative Tentacles. So I'd love to do that episode maybe next.
Yeah, I feel like that'll be us. I mean, like that was a lot of that was you, and then a lot of that was me just
Oh, it's a
getting it
team. It was
done.
a
Yeah,
team effort to make that happen, and it's taken a while, but it's really
yeah,
exciting. So I definitely want to
yeah.
give people a look at to what's going on with that and how that worked
Cool.
out. But all right, well, I think we've wrapped it up. I think we've hit it where we need to be, and this is amazing. Thank you all so much for tuning in once again. This is the Alternative Tentacles bATcast. Freya, thank you again for being a part of this episode.
Thanks for
I
having
think it
me.
was really interesting. Yeah. Oh, anytime, every time, I'm going to try and talk you into doing more episodes as
Yeah,
much as I can. Tune in on the bATcast. Next time we may have a band or maybe us again. Who
yeah.
knows? So
Maybe us
we'll
and a band. Who knows? Well,
us and a band would also be cool. This is great. Thank you all so much for being here. Check out alternativetentacles.com for anything that we've talked about to actually pick up any of these records that we've worked so hard to release. And thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
bye.
Bye.